Our sorbet bars have a soft sorbet center, so they're not like a hard fruity, like a fruit palette you think it's kind of icy. They're not that. They're very soft in the center. They melt very nice in your mouth, but then the outside is dipped in a creamy, flavorful coating.
Hello and welcome to Starting Small. My name is Cameron Nagel, and what you're about to hear is a resilient story to an entrepreneur's journey over the brand that we know and consume today. At Starting Small, I believe that everyone has a story to tell under one philosophy. Everyone starts small. Even these founders have once started where you are, in their parents' kitchen, basement, out of a wagon, and many more. At Starting Small, we discuss the strategies used, the obstacles overcome, and the successes of an entrepreneur's journey. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Starting Small, and make sure to leave a review to let us know how you enjoyed it. Thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Nicole and Deborah of SorBabes. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Yeah. So we typically like to start out with your upbringing. There's two of you guys. So if you could decide who goes first, but talk about what your childhood was like and where did you guys grow up?
Should I start? Okay. So this is Deborah Gorman, co-founder of SorBabes. I grew up in New York City. So I had a very metropolitan, early existence. And I was also surrounded by food in a very positive way. Like my grandmother taught me to cook, and I learned a lot about just really, she was immigrant, she had really delicious recipes that were a lot more flavorful and more interesting than a lot of the stuff that other people were eating. And so I learned a lot about just really good food and what it meant to really use great ingredients and how important sort of this tradition of cooking is in our family. So I grew up cooking a lot. I just would come home from school, instead of playing video games, I'd be testing things in my kitchen and trying to make different new recipes. So that's sort of where I learned how to cook basically by myself growing up, which was really fun. And then I don't know, that was the early upbringing, I guess, is how food was very important in my life.
Amazing.
Yeah. So for me, it was quite a different story. I was actually born and raised in Alaska.
Wow.
I feel like that made me always feel disconnected from the rest of the world. I was always hyper aware that I was from this weird excluded place where the lower 48 was all the cool things were happening there. And I was always wanting to find that next level and get, to the lower 48 and work on something big. I just had these huge dreams, and I like to say I had delusions of grandeur. So my big dream was I was going to go to New York City when I graduated high school to go to college, and then go work on Wall Street and live in a penthouse and make millions and millions of dollars. And that was my, dream.
Yeah.
So I got part of that. So after I graduated high school in Alaska, I moved to New York City, and I spent my years there in college. And afterwards, I got a job in investment banking. So I made it to Wall Street, and wasn't as fun and glamorous as I expected. I was working ridiculous 15, 16-hour days. People would brag about how they would sleep at the office. And, it was just a really, really tough grind. And I mean, you're paid okay, but I don't know if it's worth the sacrifice. And after a while, I started to question whether it was the reality that I wanted or this dream. And I was starting to see that I had this type A personality. I was go, go, go all the time. And I was really, really driven. And I think that at some point it was very clear to me that I was not in the right profession. So when the market crashed in 2008, the fallout of Wall Street began. It took a couple of years. And before I knew it, I was also laid off with thousands and thousands of other people in New York City. And it's actually interesting, if you look at the artisanal food movement in Brooklyn, it started in 2012, which was when SorBabes was formed. And so I think a lot of people were probably very dissatisfied in their jobs and decided to go start something. And I had always had an entrepreneurial bug. Even when I was working, I think I was always scheming up what would be the thing, what would be the next business? What's the side hustle, and nothing ever was significant enough. But with the SorBabes idea, it really just, you sort of knew it from the moment we started that it was the right thing. So.
Amazing. That's so fascinating. And I presume you both met in New York. And then Deborah, I'd like to go into, because I know you became a chef, and I know this probably leans into SorBabes creation. So where did the aspiration come from? Did you study culinary? Where did you go? And then how did you both meet in this intersection as well?
Yeah. So actually did not study the culinary arts in school. Like I was
Mm,
kind of a book smart kid too. So like I did well in high school and then I went to college and like, but I always had a creative like bend in me because I just saw myself going into a creative field. Like I didn't know exactly what it was. So I studied visual communications in school and psychology and a little bit of marketing. So that was like kind of where I ended up with like a business sided artistic combination. Like how do I combine like my business mindset and my creative side? So
yeah.
that's sort of where I ended up. And I started working in advertising. I was a graphic designer. I produced commercials. Like I did a lot of stuff in my early 20s, kind of just trying everything out and never finding something I liked. Like I always felt really like my soul was saying, kind of similar to Nicole, like it's just like, this is not what I want to do. Like, and so finally I just decided I wanted to work in restaurants. And I actually like knocked on the door at Blue Hill Stone Barns, which with Dan Barber, and he was the chef. And I just really loved the farm to table, for timetable, like mindset of just like really knowing your ingredients because everything was grown on the farm there. And so I went up to the farm and I was like, can I just work for free and stage? And like, I was like thinking of going to culinary school, but I didn't know for sure if that was what I wanted to do. And I always feel like working in the industry is like always a better way to start than like spending it could be thousands and thousands of dollars on culinary school. So I went and I worked there and I just was so happy. Like it was so stressful and crazy because these kitchens are like, they're nuts, but I just was like, I love this. I love working with food. I love like getting my hands in things and like making stuff instead of sitting in front of a computer all day. And so I started working and they gave me a job like 3 weeks later. They're like, okay, like you're good at this. Like here, like just like put you on the line and like go. And I was like, okay. And so that's sort of, I kind of learned on the job, which was a little scary, but kind of just how Nicole and I roll. For sure. So we just kind of like we just do it until, and figure it out as we go. So, so that's how it started. And then we met actually at some point in my culinary career. I worked in a bunch of different restaurants in New York City, really awesome fine dining establishments, learned a lot throughout the years, did some pastry, like worked in the pastry side, worked on savory, worked on the line. Kind of worked my way around different kitchens to learn as much as I could. And at one point I realized like, I'm not going to be a chef forever. Like it's like, it is a really hard lifestyle. And I was missing major events in my life. And I kind of knew I had the entrepreneurial spirit in me. So when I started actually private chefing one summer, because I was like, this is a fun gig. I'll go live in the Hamptons and private chef for this family. And while I was there, the family I worked for was amazing. Like I still to this day, just like wonderful people. They were like, I had so much fun. And then my boss was kind of like, he saw in me, he was a businessman. So he was like, you should start something. And we kept talking about ideas and different things. And I kind of worked for myself at that point. It was like doing catering. And then I get a call from a woman who I worked with. So I used to live in the house, and Nicole's mother-in-law was the other person who lived in the house. So she was a house manager. She would manage their house in the Hamptons. And so the two of us spent the whole summers together. We got very close. She knew me very well. She saw how I worked. And she's like, Nicole, you need to meet Deborah. Deborah, you need to meet Nicole. Like the two of you are just going to hit it off. And like, you have a very similar mindset. So we were kind of match made, and which was perfect. And we didn't know each other before we started SorBabes. We just kind of jumped into it. And, when Nicole called me and was like, I have this idea, and I'm like, well, I've made sorbet. I'm like, sorbet's a great, like I was sold instantly when she told me about it. And I was like, I'll help you. Like, let's do it. And so within like a couple of months, we just partnered up and like, we're on this crazy journey.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So Nicole, when you pitched the idea to Deborah, how far along was SorBabes? Were you prototyping, kind of experimenting yourself? What did it look like?
Yeah, I was. So, I had been, like I said, playing with different ideas and side hustles, and I had started to play around with making sorbet. And, I always give this example of going to the farmer's market and getting a whole bunch of overripe peaches that are just like, they wouldn't last another day at the farmer's market. And I brought them home and I made a homemade sorbet out of them and made like a cinnamon streusel and mixed it in. It was like a frozen peach cobbler, and sharing it with people in my building in Manhattan. And everyone was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then wanting to have something like that on a different day and not having the time. So I went to the store to find something, and there was nothing like it. And I was just like, why is there so many options for frozen desserts and, froyo and coconut ice creams and artisanal ice creams? But sorbet was always the same 3 flavors. Every brand made it, but it was like we joke, it's like the redheaded stepchild of the ice cream world. Like it was like, yeah, there's sorbet, but it's, not the top seller. And so I was like, why don't we just give this some love? And Deborah, when I, being in the culinary world, when I told her about it, because I think true chefs understand how amazing sorbet can actually be. So she, of course, was like, yes, this is a great idea. And it was very interesting working or starting a business venture with someone that you're not friends with, because I had no history with her. So in some ways, we really had to truly just jump in. And I think some of it was just naivety. We weren't maybe totally aware of how dangerous getting into business with somebody can be. I mean, fortunately, we have a great relationship now, but I still remember very vividly when I realized I could work with Deborah. We were working in an ice cream kitchen together. We would make the sorbet late at night, and it's really busy. Like you're constantly moving, and it's exhausting, and it's late at night. We were doing this we rented out an ice cream shop in the middle of the night in Brooklyn. So it was like this tiny little creamery, and we would go in at midnight and work until 5 a.m. And we would work in such synchronicity. It was almost like neither of us stopped. We didn't really have to talk too much about what needed to be done. It was just, we were anticipating each other's moves, and we were kind of dancing in the kitchen together. And I was like, and we got so much done, and we were exhausted and like to the point of tears sometimes, but we still both showed up. We still both did it. And we were like, okay, I think we both saw in each other this really strong tenacity that is necessary to go into business. And so I think at that point I was like, I know she's a hard worker, and I know she's smart. I can trust her. And, we sort of jumped in.
Amazing. I'm curious, in those early days, kind of how many flavors were you looking to go with? What did that first launch look like for you guys, especially not having business ventures by yourselves at that point? So how many flavors did you launch with? What was the size, etc.?
We actually, we started at farmers markets, and we weren't selling packaged ice cream yet. It was in bulk, so we made these. So basically it was a great test environment. So we would come up with these flavors, and we had some I would just basically go to the farmer's market and see whatever was in season, purchase it, come up with a flavor based on what I found at the market. And it was fun. We had yellow watermelon and basil, and cucumber, white wine, mint, and these really fun flavors that actually sold incredibly well. And we also came up with these nut butter flavors. So some of our flavors had, instead of just fruit, we also started using nuts. And then they weren't nut butters at that time. It was basically we created this awesome way to make these nut sorbets that had the creaminess of ice cream, but were dairy free, and you really tasted all the flavors of the different nuts. And so that was so fun to just try these out. And we got one of my favorite moments is when Yelp, we were driving across the bridge, I think going from Queens to Manhattan. And we had just finished our day working. We were exhausted. We sold out of all of our sorbet. And we get a call from Yelp, and they're like, you have a Yelp page, but you haven't set it up. You have all these reviews, people. And we started reading these reviews, and both of us, I think, started crying, because we were just oh, people are getting it. They really understand what we're doing, and it's unique, and they see it. And so we were all right, at that moment, we're okay, let's keep going. We are onto something. We're not going to stop. And so that was the first summer. And so after we kind of tested out these recipes and had a bunch of different great market research from the farmer's market, we found a very small manufacturer who could make our pints. And so we launched with about 4 or 5 flavors. I think I'm trying to remember what our launch flavors were. I mean, it was a strawberry rhubarb crumble. We had the cucumber white wine mint, which was a good learning experience, because that one sold incredibly well at the market. We would also have Hamptons farmers markets, and at the Hamptons farmers market, we could sell people 5 of those at a time for $12 a pint. At that time, that was crazy expensive, and people were just buying it, and they loved it, and they were this is the best flavor. And you put it on the shelf in the supermarket, and nobody bought it. It just sat there because people couldn't understand, why is there like the cucumber, if they didn't taste it and have that like sampling of it, or kind of be at that farmer's market experience where they're open to it, they didn't buy it. So then we shifted a little bit on our mindset of what we put on the shelf and how we launch the products in a way where they're innovative and interesting, but also comfortable and approachable. So people aren't sort of, they will like look at them and say, "Ooh, I like those two flavors. I'm going to try that together," versus being like, "Cucumber, my sorbet." Like, I don't know, so it was an interesting, really interesting learning experience early on the farmers markets, and then launching in our first stores in New York City, mostly New York City and the Hamptons was where we were selling.
For sure. Well, at launch, and especially as well leading into today, I'm curious, what are your marketing strategies? What do you find that works, especially, I know in the tasting at the farmer's market, but when you move into stores and retail, you can't really give your consumer that. So what do you find that works best for you, especially as a consumer frozen product?
That's a really good question. I think if there was a perfect answer, we'd all be like multimillionaires. I find that, well, what we found is the most important thing truly is that you get your flavors right. So like to Deborah's point, understanding that when someone's at the grocery store, the way that they look at flavors and options is probably a lot more traditional than they would if they had an opportunity to taste. So even if you go into an ice cream and dip shop, right, you'll taste some of the funky flavors, but you'll walk out with your traditional cookies and cream or whatever. That's just kind of how people are. So, I think really understanding what the consumer is looking for and the higher volume flavors is going to be really key, but then also your packaging. I think that is your first point of contact. I think everyone thinks about like marketing and social and this and that, but at the end of the day, so your packaging has to jump off the shelf and people have to be attracted to it and want to try it. So we went through a lot of packaging iterations and, tried to save money in the beginning by doing it in-house and working with like smaller, unknown designers and not understanding packaging design, I think was one of our biggest mistakes in the beginning. Words were too small. The flavor cues weren't large enough. Like, what's the hierarchy of the communication on the package? Like, what is the brand the most important thing or is the flavor name? So we have refined all of those decisions now, which I think really, really helps with our packaging. And when we go into new stores, the first line of defense is your packaging, right? Got to sell. So that's kind of the way we approach it. And then after that, then of course you layer on brand awareness with tactics on social and geo-targeted, ads and things like that. But, it's really, and then of course, retailers want you to do all of the promotions with them as well. And so a lot of stores have trained their shoppers to shop the tags. So it's like, I live in Florida right now and everyone knows at Publix, it's all about the BOGO. So you go in and when something's on BOGO, you stock up. So I think that understanding the retailer that you're in and their culture. So some retailers are high, low, and some are everyday low price. And so just understanding the tactics per retailer is also very helpful.
For sure. So I'm curious with that consumer research and marketing, what would you say is the main demographic? Have you depicted that? And what would that be?
I think, we think we're pretty sure. And I think this is hard because I think there is actually a pretty good range of people that purchase our product. We think of it's more of like, the demographic is more like social graphic, I think is the term. I'm not sure, but it's more about like a mindset versus an age or a gender, like what other ways you would break down people and it's more about what they're looking for. So our consumer, is a better for you consumer, but they also don't want to sacrifice on flavor and taste. And we've also found that our consumer is like, is sensitive to, our products are clean labels. So we're very careful of everything that goes into the product and what it is. It's dairy-free, vegan, plant-based, all that. And it's also it's gluten-free. And so it's made with like really wholesome ingredients. And then also, we're all about flavor. So I think that group of people is, they're not looking for the cheapest option out there, but they're also looking for a good value. They're, they're interested in like, we think about like-minded brands to partner with, because I think that's a really good way of thinking about our customers, because that's where, we have these great synergies with other brands that have similar values. And I think a lot of times the female consumer, without, generalizing too much, because, we are the SorBabes and a lot of the supermarket shopping is still primarily done by women, which is still interesting today, but, of course that's changing and that's great. But I think we like we see a lot of, we talk a lot about women empowerment and like being a female in brands. That's part of our mission, and to share that.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I hope that answers your question.
No, totally. I'm curious then, looking at SorBabes today and the existing market, how would you say that SorBabes is different? I know vegan, plant-based. What would you say is differentiated, especially people who aren't familiar too much with sorbet? What's like an existing like sorbet formulation that might not be healthy for consumers?
Yeah, so I think traditional sorbet is very one-dimensional. A lot of times it's made with corn syrup and high fructose corn syrup. It gives it that really silky, smooth, sort of saccharine sweet, which a lot of people associate with sorbet, which is unfortunately why I think a lot of people don't like it, or think they don't like it because they think it's going to be super sweet. And it can be icy. So there's, a lot of that. And sometimes you'll put egg white in sorbet it's like a stabilizer, as a bulker. So I think that if that was how a traditional person maybe saw SorBabes is very different. We obviously use really clean ingredients, but we also make sure that it's not too sweet. I think that we know actually when something is so sweet, you can't taste the actual flavors. What you're getting is that like sugar hit, but you're not tasting like the real strawberry. Strawberry does have a little bit of tartness to it. I mean, a real strawberry is not like a sugar bomb. So, trying to be true to that. But so one of the things that we've done when we first started, we were making our sorbet in pints, and we have transitioned to novelty bars. Because one of the things that we really wanted to showcase in sorbet, and SorBabes in particular, was layers of flavor and texture. And we felt that the bars were a much better way to deliver that. So right now, our sorbet bars have a soft sorbet center. So they're not like a hard fruity, like a fruit palette. You think it's kind of icy. They're not that. They're very soft in the center. They melt very nice in your mouth. But then the outside is dipped in a creamy, flavorful coating. So we have all these different dips that we dip the sorbet in. So it kind of gives another layer of texture and flavor. And then those have crisps in them as well. So they're actually puffed quinoa, but it just tastes like puffed rice, like a crackle bar. So, the flavor combinations we have a mango bar dipped in a creamy coconut shell with crisps. We have a strawberry bar dipped in a strawberry cream shell with crisps. We have a wild berry bar, which is this really juicy wild berry flavor, dipped in a dark chocolate shell with crisps. So it's really about you get that sweet and a little bit of that like dark chocolate to kind of combine it all. And it creates, and this is where I think Deborah's culinary background really has come into play, is, understanding palate and understanding how when you eat things, it's like those layers of complexity, which create this really wonderful, wonderful experience. And that's what I think our SorBabes deliver today.
Amazing. But looking at SorBabes today, what would you say is the top seller, the top flavor, if you have an idea?
It's hard.
Gosh, they all sell kind of similarly, which is interesting. We just looked at our years, how much we've sold in the last year. And in different regions of the country, different bars are the top seller. In the beginning of this year, we thought it was we just watched how things go. And we thought it was going to be they're all kind of in a little race, you see them going up on the charts. So our vanilla caramel we thought was our top seller. And then wild berry started picking up and winning the race. And then just recently we just see mango coconut really making leaps and bounds. So we're So I think it's just interesting. And I think mango, I think it's interesting what consumers are more comfortable with. So they'll try say, I think vanilla caramel was probably their most comfortable flavor, right? Or most, known, people eat it. So they had that one first maybe and bought a lot of that one. Then I was then they might've tried the next one that was it's just interesting to see. And the progression of how people eat. And we don't know exactly how that happens. And we don't know all the data, all the reasons why people make decisions and how that works. But I think the mango coconut is actually my favorite bar. And because it's just there's just a nice combination of tart and sweet, and it's just a nice combination. It's and the other ones are delicious too. But it's all your personal perspective. Cameron, what was your favorite? Did you taste them all? Or
I did. They're amazing. So I first tried the mango coconut and I thought this is amazing. I don't even want to try the other one. I don't want to I want my second bar to be this one. And then I actually tried the caramel one after that. And then I think I finished that box before I went back to the mango. So I actually like the caramel one best. Yeah. It's so good. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's actually an interesting one. Yeah. Well, and it's because that flavor is so different than the others because it is made with a nut butter. So it provides, I think, and again, like for people, consumers who don't know our brand, when they hear sorbet, they again expect something icy, something sugary sweet. So they don't expect this ice cream like creaminess from something that doesn't have dairy. And when we started this, it was way before the dairy-free movement, way before plant-based and vegan and any of that. So sorbet is truly traditionally dairy-free, and we just kept with that because that's what we're making. And the vanilla caramel, I think, delivers this ice cream experience that people really enjoy. I mean, it's such a great flavor. And then Deborah created that caramel chocolate, which for dairy-free, typically what you see is all dark chocolate dip because that's the dairy-free option is dark chocolate. So Deborah was able to create a sort of faux milk chocolate. So it's not truly milk, but it tastes like that with the caramel notes. And that's a really great flavor.
It's amazing. Well, I like to conclude each episode with this. If you guys could each share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned or regret along the way, what would that be?
I think I have one. I was thinking about this. I think not to quit, to just pivot.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's moments in time, and we've said this before, I think together, is that you're stuck to an idea and you're so sure about it. And then you can be so stuck on it that you don't realize it's not working and you need to pivot. So you don't have to think about it as quitting. You have to just like keep going, but make changes to adapt to like either a shift in consumer needs or a new learning about your product. And I think that's what starting small and being a small entrepreneur gives you the liberty to do versus the large companies that can't do that. Once they start, they're just on a roll and they can't like pivot so quickly. So I think that, you sometimes feel like you're failing or it's not working or things aren't going well, and you just have to step back and like assess the situation and see what's not working and why, and pivot and just say, okay, I'm not going to do it this way. I'm going to try a different way. I'm not going to quit. But it might feel like quitting at the time if you have to like let go of an idea that you're so sure about. But there's usually a way. And I think it just takes time. It takes years and years and years of building and learning, and consumer awareness doesn't happen overnight. It takes it takes just years of people. And then also learning about your product and making it better. So I think all those things to me is don't quit, just pivot. And that's my advice.
That's great advice, Deborah. I mean, and I almost piggybacking off of that sort of last idea about it takes a lot of time. I think patience. I mean, we've been at this for 10 years now. And I can tell you that when I think about any brand that I admire, no one hits that like gold level of success before 10 years. So that's a long timeline if you think about it. And even after 10 years, you can talk to entrepreneurs that you think are so successful, and every single one of them will say, I'm still just keeping my nose above water. It's just like, there's always that next level that just keeps you going. And so I think being really, really patient, and during that time, realizing that, it's all about growth and learning. So like, while you have that 10 years just to sort of get things going, which sounds, insurmountable, but it's a reality. To be really aware when you're hearing feedback that maybe doesn't jive with what your expectations were, and not being stubborn and saying, oh, I don't believe that, I'm just going to push for it. But like really understanding when the market or when people are telling you something that you need to listen to and maybe change your thought process. So I think being open and patient are two of the most important things. Oh, and one other thing, and I have to say this because if you are not an optimistic person, I don't think you should be an entrepreneur, because you have to truly always believe that that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Because if you ever doubt yourself, I don't know how you're going to make it through, because it's tough.
For sure. Well, Nicole and Deborah, thank you guys so much for joining me today. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out SorBabes at sorbabes.com.